Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. My name is TJ Jackson, and with me is my eldest brother, Taj Jackson.
What's going on, T?
What is up, Taj?
Not a mucho.
Not a mucho. Well, everyone, we are live, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. For those of you who are joining us live, we want to thank you for being here with us. You guys make the shows so much better, more interactive, which we always enjoy. So we want to thank you. You may also be listening to us via the podcast. Yes, each and every one of our episodes gets transferred, whatever, into a podcast. Don't know the term right now. My brain is a little too tired to think of it. But it becomes converted. Thank you, Taj. Converted to a podcast. And I wanted to mention that for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you are new to the show and didn't know that, you can go back and see our entire catalog of shows, over 200 shows, and find a bunch of different topics we talk about that can maybe help you more specifically. But we also wanted to mention the podcast because we ask you, if you do listen to our podcast and do find it helpful and are enjoying it, to leave a review and a comment, because it helps. It helps people find our content. And one thing we have learned and we have discussed many times is that when you're going through loss, it's often hard to find the content you need. It's often hard to do anything. So the easier we can make it for someone who may need our content, the better it is for them. We are from the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. We are a 501(c) charity, and a non-paying. No one on our board gets paid. We all do it because we want to make the world a better place, and we want to help as many people as we can. Now, as for a disclaimer, we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who've experienced loss in our lives. We've been impacted by it, and we have learned from it. And what we like to do here is share our opinions in an attempt to help you get through whatever it is you may be going through. Saying that, if you need professional help, we urge you to seek it and to find it. So please, please, please do not just rely on us. Final thing I will say before we get into our week's review is, if you want to learn more about DDJF, simply go to the website, www.ddjf.org. All right, Taj, that was our intro. Now it's time for me to pass the mic to you, and I'll start with this simple question I always ask, or almost always ask, and that was, how was your week?
Yes, my week was great. Obviously, we welcomed a beautiful baby girl July 17th. So one day after you, TJ, one day after your birthday. She didn't want to share your birthday. So
so cool.
Yeah, so that was very exciting. I mean, the whole thing was kind of an ordeal, like it's just stressful driving and all that stuff with the contractions and all that stuff, and then worrying about, your significant other in that way. But everything, turned out okay at the end. So very healthy baby. Can't ask for anything more. Healthy mama. So yeah,
that's amazing, Taj, and I thank you for sharing all of that with the community. I knew that prior, but for many out there, there's so much love and well wishes to you, and I'm thankful that you.
Yeah, and you surprised us at the hospital.
I did,
Francis.
I did. Look, it was I mentioned it actually in our family rules post. Not that we surprised you, but that we were gone for a full day recently, because we were talking about how Franny always worries about the kids when she's gone for.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I never said where we went, but we went to surprise Taj, and there was so much traffic both ways for us, so it took a while. But you know what it was, Taj? I remember, and I don't want to go too long on this because we have an amazing guest that's going to be joining us. But you shared with me a video of Royal's birth 24 years ago. Yes, 24, going to be 24 years ago. And it brought me instantly back to that feeling of
Mm,
seeing your family on that special day.
yeah.
Maybe there's a handful.
Oh, you broke up, I think. Or did I break up? No, I think you broke up. You froze, T. I don't know if you know. Guess I will be taking over from. I'm going to anticipate what he said, but I think in general, like, yeah, I had a great time just seeing family, and they come when people come and visit. Obviously, you're exhausted, but at the same time, there's so much love there in general. And with
Okay,
Toria, oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Tyler. You're
I
telling.
was gonna
I
say
don't
with
know what happened.
Toria, it was during the pandemic, so it was the guest list you couldn't really have a guest list as much, and so no, we were very excited, but yeah, you froze for like a good 30 seconds.
Yeah, I was just saying.
Oh, Jesus, for real, you froze again, which I don't even know. This has not happened before with TJ, so I'm just letting you know. Usually freezes once or like jittery, but he's frozen for everyone that can't see and is listening to the podcast. So right now, I think I will be taking over the ship right now, and I wasn't really prepared because I'm never prepared for this show in terms of that. I don't know if you guys know the secret behind it, but I come in not knowing a lot about what's going on in terms of the guests and all that stuff. I'll briefly look, but TJ is very much prepared. I like to come in fresh, like the viewership in that way, so that I can ask questions that maybe you guys would ask. And so it's going to be interesting because now it's like all the rails are off. I was, and TJ was nice enough because he knew that I didn't get any sleep yesterday. He's like, if you don't want to come in, it's okay. You could take this day off. And I'm like, no, I should be here. I'll be here. And I'm excited about the guests and in that way. And so I guess what we'll do is, and I was not prepared. Already did the disclaimer, I think. So I'm good in that way. TJ's coming back, but I was trying to stall as long as I can. But I don't even know. I know TJ asked. I would assume it's Charlene, but I know TJ asked how to pronounce your name because he always asks that in that way. I didn't get luxury in there. Let's see if TJ's coming back because I see him.
Yeah.
But
it's just Charlene Lam, just
Charlene
Lam, but like no B.
No B. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here in that way. And it's interesting for me because I learned a lot about grief just I actually suppressed my grief when my mom passed. I became the older sibling, older brother, and I really wasn't able to kind of mourn the way I wanted to mourn. I put everything aside in that way. So these shows for me have been very therapeutic in that way. Each guest brings a new perspective and really makes me open up because I'm not someone that really opens up. I like to hear other people's feelings and try and help other people, but me opening up is kind of a random thing in that way. But I think we got TJ back too.
Yeah,
probably hopefully with a fresh connection.
I hope so. I have no idea what happened, but this is
We've been talking about you.
Yeah.
It's one of the joys of
Nothing
doing
good
live.
too either. No,
I'm sure. But I don't even know where to start. I apologize.
Start with the introduction for
Okay.
Charlene.
So you know what, Charlene? Like I said, we've done more than 200 shows, and this is the
We're close
first
to
time.
300 now. Yeah.
Is it really?
I think so. No.
Well, this Charlene,
100?
this is the first time where I'm going to be reading the intro and you're going to be here. So if that's okay, you look very comfortable. So I'm not going to even worry about it.
Yeah.
I love it. So on today's show, everyone, we have right below us a very special guest. Her name is Charlene Lam. And Charlene Lam is a certified grief coach, curator, speaker, and the founder of the Grief Gallery. She helps grieving people navigate the practical and emotional aftermath of losing a loved one. And when they're ready to transform their pain loss, and grief into something beautiful so they can move forward with living their own fullest lives. With degrees in mass communication and design and over a decade of experience as a content strategist for creative brands, she turned her story-finding instincts and narrative crafting skills to grief work after the sudden death of her mother in 2013. Charlene speaks about the power of art, creativity, storytelling, and narrative development for healthy grieving and post-traumatic growth, and shares her accessible and inspiring curating grief framework for processing grief with grit and grace. I love that. I've never heard the phrase with grit and grace, but I like that. She helps busy professionals, entrepreneurs, and overburdened grieving people to navigate the practical and emotional aftermath of losing a loved one so they can emerge with their health, livelihoods, and relationships intact. As curator of the Grief Gallery, she presents exhibitions and events exploring death and grief with particular focus on the belongings of loved ones lost during international design events and festivals. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Curating Grief, a creating guide to choosing what to keep after a loved one dies. Very interesting. A proud New Yorker like her mother, she currently splits her time between New York City and Lisbon and travels frequently for work and pleasure. Here today to share more about her work with the Grief Gallery. Without further ado, please welcome everyone, Miss Charlene Lam, to the Power of Love show. So, Charlene, we need like a clapping track.
I actually looked into that, and we can have that. I was always wondering, maybe the chat can help us out in that way. Is that disruptive now that we've done so many shows and now all of a sudden claps start happening? It feels like it should have something, but it's like, I don't know, like in that way.
Yeah, well, you know what? This is cool because Charlene, I have to say, this is normal where everyone says welcome to you, hello, and good to be here and all that stuff to you. But not often do we have a guest that will say something like this. Oh, wow. I follow the Grief Gallery. I love that the grief curators I follow are being interviewed by DDJF. Yeah. So that is very, very cool. And Jennifer is awesome and a big supporter of ours. So to see she knew you and what you guys do is an amazing, amazing thing. So
community and connection, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah. So before I start asking on-topic questions, Taj, we've never been to Lisbon, right?
Oh.
No, I don't think we have for promotion and stuff. No.
Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah. Okay. And to make sure I'm thinking of the right Lisbon, Portugal, correct?
Lisbon in Portugal. Absolutely.
Okay. Just want to make sure it's not like Lisbon in New Jersey or something.
Lisbon, Ohio.
Yeah. Some of those, yeah.
Just want to make sure. And what I like to do is also educate myself primarily, but anyway, what do we need to know about Lisbon? Why do you go to Lisbon? What do you like about Lisbon? Tell me something cool about Lisbon, because it doesn't get enough pub to me.
100 reasons for Lisbon and Portugal. Sometimes I say sunshine and sardines.
Oh,
but also I kind of say it's part of my personal grief journey.
Ooh,
nice.
How so?
Well, I think right, there are all these different phases where after we lose someone, there's a lot of focus on, oh, they died. How did they die? And then it shifts to, how do they live? And then I think very naturally at some point, we start shifting the question to, how do I want to live? And moving away from the kind of hustle of New York, moving to someplace beautiful, bringing elements of like holiday life into my everyday life was part of my answer. So moving to Lisbon, moving to Portugal has been part of answering that.
That's great.
What in particular was Lisbon? Why Lisbon and not Madrid or Brussels?
Madrid is landlocked. So that was a big factor. Portugal has a ton of coast, a lot of beach. It's very friendly. I visited here a number of times, and you could very easily get a view of the water. And that brings me back to my mom too. Like my mom loved a view of the water. Nice. When she died, she had built her dream house by a lake.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
So that was on my list. I want
Very
a view of
cool.
the water.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that is.
I gotta get there. I gotta get there.
You are all invited. Audience too.
Yeah, I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. So, Charlene, obviously, the grief gallery is your thing. My question is, what experience, if you can, in more detail, what experience in your life led to the inspiration behind launching the grief gallery?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like a lot of us who do this work, it is grief and loss. As we mentioned, I lost my mother, Marilyn, 10 years ago. It was January 2013, and she had a stroke. And she was living in New York, where she's from. And at the time, I was living in London. And I was working as an independent curator. So I was working with artists and designers, and I was doing exhibitions. So, like pop-up exhibitions showing their work. When she died, she left that 3,000 square foot dream house by the lake, and it was full of stuff. And I'm an only child. So I knew, oh, okay, I'm going to have to fly to New York, figure out what to do with the paperwork, what to do with the house, all the things in the house. And I think it's a pretty common phenomenon. I don't know if you've experienced it or people listening, but all of those everyday items in her house became really precious. And I could not imagine letting go of anything. And that was a problem because I had to sell the house. So my uncommon solution was to really lean into my creativity and my background as a curator and say, okay, imagine that I was to do an exhibition about my mother. Which 100 objects would I choose to display? And that was like the creative brief that got me out of paralysis, got me choosing things through this kind of creative lens. And at first, it was just an imaginary exhibition. But 2.5 years after my mother died, I did my first in-person exhibition in London. And I showed some of those objects from her house. And that was really the start of the Grief Gallery.
So it's a very powerful and unique concept. I've never heard of that, and I think it's brilliant. I really do.
I do too. Yeah, that is right on the money. Brilliant. Yeah.
We talk about going to eat at restaurants, in our case, where our mother liked to go and are listening to music that she liked. But what I love about the grief gallery, it's such a tangible and real thing. And oftentimes, I was the youngest. I am the youngest, and I was 16 years old when my mother passed. And all of the belongings from the house, they went to a family storage unit, except a couple items. I was able to grab a couple items that were easy to move around, and I could hold. I wanted to hold on to them, and I'm so happy I did, because we ended up losing all of that content from whatever situation. It was just a disastrous situation for us, because we lost a lot of our mother's stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, those who follow us know the backstory, and I'm not going to go into it, but the point I want to...
I'm going to go into a little bit later, just because I know there's going to be a question about it. But go ahead, TJ. Keep going.
No, if you want to go on. I mean, my point is that we didn't have, or at least I didn't have that much that represented her, that's tangible.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine what it's like when, in your situation, when you have this whole house of stuff and you don't know what to do with it. But I think most people would just go and sell it or throw it out in a way. And I like how you put a number at 100 of items. I just think your idea is incredibly smart. I don't know how else to say it, but I love it, because I think it will help anyone who's with the grieving process when they can feel things and have memories and attachment to things. It's a really cool idea.
I appreciate
Was there something
that.
you want to add, Taj?
Well, it's very creative too in that way too, because it's like, I'm sure grabbing the items brings back memories. If it was something that you personally saw them wear, do, or whatever it was, or create, but then also there's probably was items that you never had seen, and you were like, what's this? And kind of curious about that too. Is almost like a mystery in a certain way. So yeah, I'm just fascinated with this whole thing.
Charlene, was this always your? Let me say it this way: what was your vision for the Grief Gallery when you first initially launched it?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting the way that our relationship with the items evolve. And thank you so much for sharing a bit of your experience too, right? Because it really did start off with my personal experience, my personal problem. And I think when I first did that exhibition, it really was the memorial that I really wanted to give my mother. Right? Frequently, the official funeral, the official memorial doesn't always feel right. It's a bunch of people. It's kind of decision by committee as to what gets included. And sometimes we don't always feel like it represents the person. And especially if it's been a sudden loss, if we're in shock, it's really hard to make some of those choices about how we talk about our person in that context. So I was in shock for 2 years after my mother died because it was so sudden. I know your loss was also very sudden and under very difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
So her official memorial, which was a couple of months after she died, it was fine. It was in a Chinese restaurant. It was a little weird, I thought. So it wasn't until after I sold her house and 2.5 years after she died that I was like, okay, this exhibition really tells the story of my mother. It really represents her in the way that I want people to remember her. So initially, it was just for me. It was personal expression. It was a tribute to my mother. It was telling stories about her. And then eventually, I started inviting other people's stories because I found so many people wanted to share. So many people had objects and belongings with such amazing stories, powerful meanings attached to them. So that's, yeah.
Charlene, can you walk us through how the Grief Gallery works?
Yeah. So sometimes it's an in-person exhibition because my background is in the design field. It all started off doing these international design exhibitions. So I've done in-person installations and exhibitions in London, in New York, and in Toronto. And also on thegriefgallery.com, I do online exhibitions because, well, especially during the pandemic, some limited options there, but a lot of people who needed to talk about grief and to talk about their loved ones. So the exhibition features belongings or objects that remind us of our loved ones. I show some of the items from my mother or my grandmother or other family members, and I invite visitors to bring in objects to show. Sometimes they're photographed and sometimes they're just kind of displayed in that gallery space. We want to hear the stories.
Wow.
So powerful. It's great. It's really, really, I love how, I don't want to say simple it is, but how it's so cool. It really, really is a powerful way to mourn and grieve and love a loved one. It's a beautiful thing, and I like I'm kind of dumbfounded that I haven't heard of this before, but I like it, Charlene.
Yeah, right. You kind of feel like, wow, yeah, this is.
It's just such like it's so obvious, but it's not. So it's really cool.
It's so fundamental, right? If I might point out, right, that yes, when I talk about curating, that was my profession. I had a gallery space that I was already kind of working in. And most people don't have a gallery space, but I see behind you, you have photos in frames, you have a fireplace mantle, you have wall space, people have shelves. We're choosing all the time what goes in our spaces, what takes up room. So that's why I really do believe we are all curators, especially after a loved one dies.
Yeah.
Charlene, what's been the most rewarding and challenging part of bringing your vision to life?
Rewarding is definitely hearing people's stories. I think we've spoken before, in your show and in other kind of environments about how much we want to talk about our loved ones and seeing people the way they light up. And the stories are so amazing. They're fascinating. Some are really kind of universal. A lot of watches, a lot of lipstick tubes. And then some items are really specific. a certain kind of food, or this model boat that this woman in Toronto, she brought in, that was like a big wooden boat that her father had carried from Africa to UK to Canada. And that lived on her shelf. And it was really impressive to see, and to see that he had chosen that as a precious item to carry through his life, and that now it lives in her space.
Powerful. Yeah. What have you, okay, let me say it this way. Since starting the Power of Love show, my brothers and I think we've learned a lot. We've talked to so many different guests and learned about loss, grief, things to do, things to say, things not to do, the importance of just being and taking it day by day. We've learned a lot. I'm curious to know, what have you learned about yourself since launching the Grief Gallery?
I've learned that I've always loved stories. That it felt random at first, of like, oh, this is interesting. But I realized, oh no, there was always a thread back. I wanted to be a journalist. I was doing communications consulting, and I thought it was a total pivot and change when I decided, no, I want to focus on the grief work. I want to become a grief coach. I want to do the Grief Gallery. But looking back, I'm like, oh, it's all stories. It's always been stories.
Yeah. How, if at all, has your perspective of grief changed since bringing the Grief Gallery to the world?
I think it's kind of heightened how important the circumstances of our losses are. Right? It started with my personal story, my personal experience, but in speaking to people, in working with clients, it's, wow, okay, the range of circumstances, whether the loss was sudden or not, if there were traumatic circumstances, what were life circumstances? I was an adult when I lost my mother. You were young when you lost your mother. That affects, right, whether you have choice in what gets kept, and finances. Some people can't afford a storage unit. They can't afford to keep the house or anything. So that's been really eye-opening of how circumstances just play into our experiences of grief.
Todd, do you have something you want to ask?
No, I mean, when our mom passed, the first thing that everyone thought was get them out of the house. And so really if a house was a thing in terms of a person, I didn't even really get to say goodbye to the house in that way. It was almost like we were out, and I think we got to grab some stuff later on. But it was like, that was kind of another separation aspect of the whole thing. But that's why there's more to the story of, like, when you bring up about the items and stuff like that. Our circumstance was kind of weird because a lot of the stuff we found out later that we weren't going to ever have again in that way, and some of the stuff we were able to reclaim and stuff like that. But we'll talk more about that, because I wanted to just say, with what you're doing and this whole idea, and that TJ was young. TJ was 16. I was 21. So it was a different, age thing there. But at the same time, you do have these memories with these items in that way. And it was really hard to lose the house, but because I wasn't financially secure at that time to make the payments, I didn't even know about payments in that way at that point. That was I just assumed that the payments were still being made, and then
go ahead, Taj.
We drove by one day and someone else was living at the house. That's how I kind of found out.
Did it just fall through the cracks?
I think it fell through the cracks because my mom had been making payments, and she quit claimed it at one point. But I assumed that whoever was helping was gonna at least alert us that this was happening. And I think someone made, and this is what you said about decisions, someone made the decision for us to get rid of the house without really asking us if we wanted the house or not, if it was worth us fighting for the house or trying to get the house in that way.
And
I'm sorry.
To add to that, we're older teens and young 20s. That's the last thing you want to think about when you just lost your mother. So it's not even something that's on our radar to even think about. And stuff that now, and as we're adults and older, it's realizing it's like, oh, it would have been nice to have had that house just for the memory's sakes, and to be able to have had some type of closure with it. So there's this is something that you don't know or are aware of until you usually get to an older age, and it, so it's all interesting stuff, it's all interesting stuff.
That sounds so incredibly hard. Right?
Yeah, it's
21
challenging.
is young.
Yeah, 21 is young. Yeah. I always wanted to be young in general, but I think once my mom passed, I had a lot of growing up to do anyway, and that way it was a balance of trying to still mentally stay and young at heart, but at the same time realizing that traumatic thing has now kind of aged me in a way.
Yes. And I just want to note too that, like you said, it's another loss.
Yeah.
It's all these layers of loss. And that's often what we find, right? Yeah. There's the initial loss and then all that comes around it, some of the circumstances of it. My particular problem was having the burden of making decisions, of having too much stuff. And then other people, like you mentioned, you didn't have a choice. Or some people will say, my dad threw out everything. Or my stepmother threw out everything. I didn't get to keep anything. Or I didn't get to keep what I wanted. So just acknowledging, like, these are so many layers of loss.
Yeah.
Very, very impactful stuff.
Yeah.
Back on the Grief Gallery, I'm curious to know, Charlene, what is your long-term vision for it, the Grief Gallery?
World domination.
Yeah. Country by country.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually, because I do want to spread the word. You've been so kind to kind of really respond to the concept. And I do find that when I share it, people say, oh, it seems simple and it's so fundamental and so human. So I want more people to know about the concept. I would love to travel the world doing pop-up exhibitions for people's loved ones.
That's great. Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be, right, at the time of the loss. We can do a memorial afterwards. Sometimes it's 10 years after, sometimes it's 20 years after. And then, of course, like a Netflix show around that. So,
yeah,
I love it. I love it.
That's so good.
I want to bring up this overlay, is the correct term, for the Grief Gallery, putting the spotlight on the belongings of loved ones lost. Go to the griefgallery.com, TheGriefGallery.com. Again, thegriefgallery.com. Want to make sure everyone understands all the spelling and all that stuff. But I just love the concept and all you're doing with it, Charlene. I think it's brilliant and just very powerful. Again, it's a unique and new thing for me that I'd never heard of. And we've done hundreds of shows and this never crossed my mind, but it's a very powerful concept. And I just think it's great.
Yeah. Thank you for spreading the word.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Do we have time for me to ask do you have any kind of objects or belongings that you want to share with us?
Oh, I'm sure we could think of something. What's interesting, we've gradually gotten more and more of our stuff back, thanks to another unique thing, seeing our stuff on auction sites and either bidding it for it ourselves or sometimes some big collectors will.
Let me go into it real quick, G, just so that, because we kind of set up. So we got shuffled out of the house and then the stuff went into a family storage and somehow that storage got lost. And when I say lost, there's some lien on it or whatever that ended up being auctioned, whatever was in that storage. So my mom's, our whole house, basically, all our memories were auctioned off in a Vegas auction. And so it now became what's valuable to us and what can we let go in terms of that. Like, we didn't have the decision of, let's throw this out. It was almost like, what are we going to bid on and what aren't we going to bid on is really what it came down to. And the choice was always a sentimental choice. So some things like my high school diploma is on, someone has my high school diploma. Because to me, that wasn't as important as something that my mom had, which was, something that I just brought back a memory of my mom. I'll take that over a piece of paper that is just, I mean, it's important, but at the same time. And now if I had a memory with that high school diploma and my mom, and in that way, then that would have been different in that. But yeah, so to answer your question, I did bring something in terms of that we kind of auctioned, and it's a really crazy story because obviously us being Jacksons, everything was 4 times as expensive, and they made up stories about what things were. All my mom's stuff from her clothing became LaToya's clothing. And so now it's 4 times as expensive just for, a shirt that is my mom's because they said it was LaToya's shirt. And so we just had to choose what we were going to take and what we weren't, and what we were going to bid and what we weren't. And so I brought this, and TJ knows probably once he sees it what it is. I'm holding on to it. It's actually all 3 of ours, but it's this guy.
Oh wow!
Yeah, you didn't even know this little guy. And I don't even remember how we personally, me, Charlene, TJ got it for our mom, but it was on her bed. And
the gizmo.
The gizmo was on her bed. And this gizmo doll, during the auction, they made up a story that this was given by Steven Spielberg to Michael. And so this little gizmo doll cost us $300 to get back, which is ridiculous. But at the same time, it represented my mom and just memories of sitting on her bed with the gizmo doll there, just in general, it just was that way. And so, yeah, I've held on to this for, as you know, in that way. One of the few things I had. So when I knew you were coming on, that was one of the few things that I do have still that represent my mom in that way. Obviously pictures doing whatever, but that's the one item that I think I have that was like, okay, I know that was my mom's, and I don't even know where I think we won it in a fair or something. I don't know what it was or something, but it's the property of all 3 of ours, but I'm holding on to it because
that's cool.
I think I hold on to things the best out of the 3 of us anyway.
Well, Todd, it's funny you say that because I have a couch from our house. Don't know how I have it, but I have a couch and it takes up so much space.
Yeah.
And because of the sentimental value, I haven't gotten rid of it.
I know
no one sits on
too. Yeah.
But it takes up so much space, and I go through this like mind, dilemma or negotiation. What am I supposed to do with the couch? But it's really my only real memory from that time period that's tangible and physical. So I haven't gotten rid of it, but
it's such a unique couch in a way that it's not like, it's not special except for that it was,
but this by the way, Charlene, this is why I love what you do, because it gets people talking about their loved ones and their grief and their loss. And I think, Taj would agree, what we've learned doing the show is the importance of getting it out and talking and not bottling those emotions in. And what you do and the way you do it is in such a natural, powerful way. It's very impactful. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I really feel that way.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories. Yeah. Right? Seeing your faces light up and the stories that you shared. Yeah. And I love how you kind of highlighted that it's not like the super expensive kind of things that are most precious to us. It is those sentimental items. And when we're talking about circumstances, those are very unique circumstances. When we're talking about making choices, you had to make choices in an auction to get back the things. Yeah. And also noticing what are your stories versus made up stories and interpretations that other people have, and the way that you have reclaimed those stories.
Yeah.
As well as reclaiming the items.
Yeah.
So thank you
for
sharing.
A lot more items to go, but yeah, that's been the hardest thing, is still seeing a lot online, but at the same time, it's I think that's one of the reasons why for the Grief Gallery in general, I'm so fascinated by it, is because it seems like such an incredible idea, but as you said, we brightened up, we were smiling, laughing, and all that stuff. It gets people talking, and I think that's what's so genius about it.
Yeah, well said, Taj. Now, Charlene, you also offer a virtual monthly grief gatherings. I shouldn't say but you also offer virtual monthly grief gatherings. What can attendees, first, can you talk about it a bit? And then what can attendees expect from these gatherings? And how can viewers join?
Yes. So it is a monthly grief gathering for the Grief Gallery, and you can join. It's on Zoom, so you can join from anywhere in the world. It's the last Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So next one is next Wednesday on the July 26th, but also every month. But the idea is, in the same way that you've chosen something to share, imagine that you're invited into a virtual gallery space and you are invited. What would you like to present to all of us in this room? What object do you want to kind of put on a display pedestal? Tell us a story. Why this object? What stories are attached to us? Tell us about the person. And it's really this invitation. And we always have beautiful discussions. Sometimes we do some troubleshooting around objects and, some conflicts with people, but it's always beautiful. And you can go to thegriefgallery.com and there'll be a link there.
I have another overlay with some information on that. Grief Gallery monthly gatherings. Then, as Charlene just said, the next gathering will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. That is 7 p.m. in the UK and 8 p.m. in most European countries. But you can meet up with the curator, the one and only Charlene Lam, at our monthly grief gatherings on Zoom, the last Wednesday of the month. So the best way to go and get registered is by, again, going to griefgallery.com.
Thegriefgallery.com.
Thank you, Taj. Thegriefgallery.com.
Thank you. Thegriefgallery.com.
Yeah, thank you, Taj. Yes, thank you. Charlene, anything else we should mention about the monthly gatherings? Because there's one more topic I want to bring up with you.
No, just that it really is that invitation. And that belief that you are all curators and these stories are important, right? That these objects reveal so much for us individually and collectively.
I love that because objects can help us open up, and stories and sharing really can pay dividends in the grieving process. So again, I think it's brilliant, and I love it because it's less intimidating when you have something to say than going into these groups not knowing what to say, too nervous, and the items give you a key to open up and talk, and it's beautiful.
Yes. And it's not grim. Sometimes grief groups can be a little grim. It's not grim.
Great point.
So true.
And sometimes, if you're thinking of items, for us, we were lucky, right? It sounds like we all had beautiful relationships with our mothers. So we were lucky in that instance. And for some people, when they think of items, they're like, I've got some not so great memories here. And that's where I'm like, okay, let's bring this to grief coaching. Because not everything is going to bring up a great memory. But I do think that those objects can be so powerful in revealing, okay, what are some kind of things we want to look at and work on as well?
Charlene, hearing you and speaking with you for the last 35, 40 minutes or so, it's obvious that you are an awesome person, and you really are. It's easy to see, but one thing that's also obvious is that you are versed in and passionate about grief. You are a grief coach. Can you tell us a bit about your approach in coaching, and what clients can expect from working with you, and how, last but not least, how viewers can get in touch with you to learn more or to maybe have a session?
Sure. Yeah, when I decided, okay, this was really effective for me in terms of guiding me through my own grief, and I wanted to help other people, I developed my Curating Grief framework for use in grief coaching. So I'm certified as a life coach, but also in grief coaching and all kinds of grief education. But with Curating Grief, it really is that idea of how do we bring that lens? How do we walk you through that process of choosing with intention, because that's how I define curating, really. It's choosing with intention. When we experience a loss, when we experience these circumstances that are outside of our control, I find that it's really important to, one, acknowledge and process all that's happened, and then two, to identify what is in our control, what choices do we have, what skills can we build, so that we can live our own lives moving forward, bringing our loved ones forward with us, but in a way that feels doable, that feels like we're not just surviving, but we're thriving. And of course, I bring a lot of art and creativity into it.
It's awesome. Awesome. So to learn more, you can go to our email, hello@thegriefgallery.com. Is that correct?
Yep. You can go to thegriefgallery.com or to my coaching website, which is just my name, charlenelam.com, and you can find information about all of that. Links everywhere.
Nice. That's great. And I think this is probably, well, not the final question, but one of the later questions. You obviously are doing so much in the grief space, and being in the grief space is not easy. So at least my assumption. I guess I should have asked you first. Do you find working in the grief space to be draining emotionally, physically, or mentally? And if so, how do you, Charlene, how do you restore yourself?
Yeah, it can be, but I've been very intentional about how I set up my life. So one, I make sure I have a lot of beauty in my life, whether it's the view of the river. I buy myself flowers all the time. I surround myself with art, because this work to me is about finding beauty, making beauty to balance out that kind of inherent ugliness in life. So I have a lot of beauty. And also I do this as a tribute to my mother, right? You do this as a tribute to your mother.
Yeah.
And that definitely fuels me. My mother loved helping people. She was training to be a social worker when she died. She had grief resources in her house that were like one of the first things that I read about grief. So this work is very much a continuation of my relationship with my mother. So I definitely feel that.
I love that answer, by the way. And again, that was a unique answer. I never thought of it that way, but the power of beauty and art in restoring in grief. It's a very cool concept. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I am a big reader. Taj is a big audiobook listener. I'd say he's a rung below me, but it's okay. He's on the ladder. I'm setting it up basically because I'm excited for your forthcoming book, Curating Grief, a creative guide to choosing what to keep after a loved one dies. Can you just tell us a bit about it, when it can be expected? And then I'm sure I already know what Taj is going to ask, but I'll let him ask that question when after your explanation for your upcoming book.
I've been working on this book forever because I want to get this out into the world, but it is going to get done this fall.
Cool.
But it's going to center around that idea of 100 objects, of telling the stories of 100 objects, not just my mother's, but of the range of people that I've spoken to in the 10 years since, and sharing this idea of curating grief and using these 100 objects to tell these different aspects of the roles that these items play. Are they evidence to us? Are they artifacts? How do we interpret them? So I want that book to be like a little guide, another tribute to my mom. But I talk about her all the time. So it's such a joy to me to be able to come on shows like this and to talk about her. I launched my own podcast, Curating Grief, same name. I would love to have you on.
Yes.
And we talk about the objects, right? So yeah, I just want to get it all out there.
That's beautiful. I'm happy you mentioned the podcast. I didn't know about that. So yes.
So many projects.
Yeah, I love it. We need it. That's one thing that Taj and I always say is, there's not enough stuff out there, and the more we could talk about it, the better. Now, Taj, go ahead and ask your question that I know you would want to ask.
Yeah. How far I would say is the audiobook from the book?
There it is.
You have such a great it's not only because you have a great voice. It's just what I love about audiobooks in general is especially if it's read by the artist or the person that wrote the book, is hearing, as you say, whether it's the joy, the sorrow, it's hearing the emotion behind them. Because when I read, I interpret the emotion, but when they tell me their stories, I feel the emotion in that way.
And by the way, that's not too fair because she hasn't even released a book and we're already asking about an audiobook.
I know. She's the one that said she wanted all these projects. So like, I'm just kidding.
She did it like this too, Tosh.
Yeah. Yeah, in that way. It's because it's such a great, I mean, this concept is such a great concept. So that's why I was just wondering. In that way.
I appreciate the enthusiasm. And I think that's part of why I wanted to do the podcast, because I love podcasts. And really talking about it and hearing other people's stories really brings it to life.
Yeah.
So it's just that I can't include illustrations with the podcast. Yeah. So I want both. Yeah. So I do find that I'm going to be using the podcast to capture some of those stories. So there will be kind of cross, right? Yeah. So, but I will add that to the note. Audiobook for Taj, dedicated to him.
For people like Taj, yes, definitely.
But also, there's a documentary in the works.
Oh, right.
Cool.
Yeah. So, this amazing guy in the UK who lost his father came across the concept and said, "Can I make a short film about you?" Wow. So I was like, okay. So I think that's coming out by the end of the year. We'll see.
So cool.
So but thank you for helping to spread the word.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now there's a couple of we're gonna wrap up shortly, and we want to make sure we get we need a name for this thing, Taj, where we give our guests the time to talk. So we need to figure out a name. But before we even do that, there's a couple of let's just go ahead. Let's do that first. And I did prepare you. I'm happy I can say Warren, Taj. I think I'm done with that word. I prepared you, Charlene. I gave you a heads up that we were going to be asking this. So if you don't mind taking a minute or so or less, more, whatever time you feel is appropriate to leave our audience with something that you want to leave them with. It could be on topic. It could be off topic. It could be about really anything. So I'm going to ask you, Charlene Lam, what do you want to leave our community with?
I want to leave you with an invitation that I would just want to reiterate that I believe we are all curators after a loved one dies. So I want to invite you to come to my free monthly grief gathering. Tag me on Instagram. I'm at curating_grief. Share something that you've kept. Share something that you wish you still had. Share an object that reminds you of your loved one. Tap into that power of you being the curator and having some of these choices when you've experienced all this that's outside of your control. And I also want to offer that if you are also in that instance of, I don't have those things, what do I do? We can also create and commission. So, which is also something that curators do. So we talked about our houses, right? Your mom's house. This is an illustration that I commissioned in memory of my mother's house. I could not keep the house. I couldn't afford to keep the house. There was a mortgage on it.
Of course.
So I commissioned an illustrator to make me an illustration of the lake, of the view of the swans, of the trees, of the little animals. And the caption at the bottom says, "Her dream house by the lake." And so cool. This is a way that I keep something that I couldn't physically keep. So I'm going to encourage people to consider that as well. There's a whole range of ways we can curate.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. As Shauna says, amazing. Yours truly, April, says that's beautiful. Love it. Love it, love it. Okay, so there's a couple other comments I want to highlight. Teresa says, you got to read the intro in the description box. Teresa, you got me curious to know what the intro says in the description box. But more on topic, Carol says, I have pictures of my mom and my parents and hung up my parents' wedding picture. Love that. And then we have Shauna, who says, I have a memory from the senator's office from the state of Kentucky. It says, how many lives my mom changed. I will cherish it forever. I love this because this leans right into what Charlene talks about with these tangible items that can be so profound and huge for us. And then Jennifer says, I'll make a donation on your website in honoring your B-Day, TJ. Well, thank you. For Taj's B-Day, which is coming up. So on behalf of Taj, I know he says thank you. And for Charlene Lam, this chat is 100% in my existence. Very, very sweet. And just 5 minutes later, Jennifer came back with made the donation as promised. We received it. So thank you so much, Jennifer. And then she says, please follow Charlene Lam. This is exactly what we are doing in the metaverse with the UHM Museum, Universal Hip Hop Museum. I love that.
Yeah.
So since Jennifer mentioned it, we need to follow Charlene. Again, Instagram is at curating_grief. Twitter has the same handle at curating_grief. And then don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, The Grief Gallery. Charlene Lam's website is Charlene Lam, CharleneLam.com, or you can also go to thegriefgallery.com to learn more. Charlene, did I miss anything? That's the first question.
You didn't say when you're coming to Lisbon.
Okay. Yeah, first I got to make sure my passport is still active. But I will get there. I will definitely get there. Anything else that I miss?
No, I just want to say that your audience is amazing. Thank you so much for the amazing comments and for having me and for your really open sharing.
Well, thank you, Charlene, for being here, and you are always welcome back. When you get the book out, please come back. Tell us, everyone. We'd love to do a show around the book.
Yes.
And you are just fantastic. I really appreciate all you are doing for the grieving world. I think you are incredibly unique and therefore incredibly important. So continue on and just know you have my brother and my support, as well as our entire foundation and our community. So thank you so much for joining our Power of Love show. Taj, was there anything else I may have missed, my man, or anything else? And thank you, Taj, for coming in, just a couple of days after a baby being born. So I appreciate it.
No, of course. As I said, I took a sneak peek I normally don't, but I took a sneak peek of just what today was going to be to see if you could handle it on your own. And I was like, I got to be here. I got to be here for this seems too incredible in that way. So that's why I'm here. So thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for bringing Gizmo.
Yes.
Special guest.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Gizmo in 25 years.
Yeah, I haven't seen Gizmo forever in that way. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much. All right. I think we are good, Charlene and Taj. Anything else? One final word before I close out the show? We're good?
We're good.
All right, cool.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Charlene, for joining us. We will be back next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Thank you for those of you who commented. Thank you, Jennifer, for the generous donation to the foundation. Really appreciate it. And that's it. You all have a wonderful rest of your week.
For all the congratulations too. I'm reading them all, so thank you. So I appreciate it.
We will see you guys next Wednesday. Charlene will hopefully see you in the fall for the book. But yes, that's the plan. And go ahead and conquer that world, Charlene. We need more of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, you guys, we will see you next Wednesday. Adios.